Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome, dear students, in your chemistry class. Today, we will continue the chapter 3, that is methods of purification. And in today's lecture, we will discuss about some separating techniques. So, the contents of today's topic include separation of insoluble solid from liquid. And for such kind of separations, we use any of the following technique, that is decanting, filtration, centrifuging, and we also discuss we also will discuss about separation of solid from solution. So let's move towards our topic. Firstly, how to separate a solid from a liquid. For such kind of separations, we can use one of the technique that is called decanting. The simplest way to separate any solid from the liquid. Decanting is a simplest way, and it means that carefully pouring off the liquid and leaving the undissolved solids. Let's suppose if you look at this picture. This jar contains water and lot of pebbles. If we want to separate these pebbles from the water, then the simplest way is to just pour off the liquid that will leave behind the pebbles. So this method is called decanting. We use decanting to separate any dense insoluble solid from a liquid. So decanting is carried out every day during many activities. For example, during cooking, water is poured off various cooked foods by decanting. So it's a simple method that is routinely performed in our daily activities, and for such kind of um, mixtures that include some solid particles like pebbles, like sand particles or clay particles. So for these kind of separations, we can use this method. Okay, how this method is performed. Let's suppose you can see in this picture two beakers. One of the beaker contain the mixture, and the mixture include insoluble solids and the liquid. So uh, we just perform this experiment by pouring off the liquid carefully. The liquid will go into the other beaker, leaving behind these insoluble solids that you can clearly see over here. Okay, so that is the simplest way, that by simply pouring off the liquid, we can separate any dense insoluble solid from a liquid. Okay, that was the first method for separation of such kind of mixtures. The next method that we will discuss here is filtration. You are familiar for such kind of separations. To separate sand from water, we use a method that is known as a filtration. In general, we use filtration to separate small solid particles from a liquid. Okay, the examples of small solid particles include sand, clay, dust particles, and precipitates. So if we having such kind of mixtures and we want to separate these mixtures, or we want to get purification, so we can use the technique that is called filtration. And here we discuss the point precipitates. What are precipitates? These are some small solid particles which can be produced in a liquid by a chemical reaction. So if in a chemical reaction some solid particles are produced that are not soluble in that liquid, so but they are produced by or as a result of a chemical reaction. So these particles are known as precipitates. So precipitate, it refers to the insoluble solid particles in a liquid. So for such kind of mixtures, we can perform filtration for their separation. So we will see that how the procedure takes place. For example, if we having a mixture of any salt, sand and water, and we want to separate sand from the salt solution, so for such kind of separation we have chosen this technique that is named filtration. And to carry out filtration, we must have a filter funnel, that is filter funnel, which is you can see over here, it is also labeled. And in filter funnel, we use a filter media that is called filter paper. It's a kind of paper that is commonly used in lab to perform different experiments. And filter paper is a type of paper having small holes. Okay, so in the funnel, we first of all we fold the filter paper and place that filter paper into this filter funnel. You can see that this is a beaker which contains the reaction mixture, and reaction mixture contains mixture of any salt, sand and water. Okay, we simply allow the liquid or the mixture to pass through the filter funnel. After some time, when you simply pour the mixture into the filter funnel, you will see that some of the liquid passes through the filter paper and go to the flask that is put behind this filter funnel, and some of the insoluble particles, they remain on the filter paper. So the liquid that passes through the filter paper, that liquid is called filtrate. Okay, and if we point out that in this kind of experiment, when we took the mixture of salt, sand and water, then the filtrate contains salt and water, because salt is soluble in water, and these particles can easily pass through the pores of filter paper, while on the filter paper some solid particles remain that are called residue. The insoluble, how can we define a residue? The insoluble solid which is collected on the filter paper, that is called residue. And in this experiment, the sand particles, they act as a residue, because these sand particles being insoluble, they remain on the filter paper, while salt and water being miscible or soluble with each other, they can easily pass through the filter paper, and this is called filtrate. Okay, in this way, from the given mixture, we have separated sand from the salt solution. Okay, so if we want to separate, or if we want to purify the sand, so we can further wash it with distilled water, and then we can um, obtain the pure sand in this form. Okay, so that was a method for separation of mixture of this kind that contains insoluble particles and any liquid. Okay, so that was the complete description of filtration. Okay, next we will further see that how the filtration works. As we discussed earlier, that solid can be separated from a liquid by filtration because the filter paper act as a sieve. Okay, a liquid can pass through the pores. Pores means the small holes on the filter paper, but the solid cannot do so. Again, have a look over it. The filter funnel, filter paper, the mixture. After doing the experiment, the residue remain on the filter paper, and the filtrate, it gets separated and goes to the other beaker. So the large insoluble particles, they are trapped by the filter paper and become the residue. You can see here that these are the solid particles. Their size is larger and they can't pass through the small holes of the filter paper. While from the filtrate, you can see that these are the small particles of the liquid that easily pass through the filter paper and they become filtrate. So that is the actual representation how filtration works. Okay, that was the second method for separation of such kind of mixtures. And the third technique that we can use, before going to the third technique, we will discuss some uses of filtration, that is removal of solid impurities from water in treatment works. In any water treatment works, if we want to separate some solid impurities from the water, okay, they can easily removed by the filtration and separation of insoluble salts from water. Similarly, if we having a mixture that contains water and some insoluble salts, so for such kind of separations we can also use filtration. But if we do comparison between decanting and the filtration, then although decanting is a quicker method and filtration is a slower procedure, but filtration is more effective as compared to decanting. Okay, the third technique that can be used for separation of such mixtures is centrifuging. It separates the insoluble solid particles from the liquid. It also do the same. It also works on the same principle, or it also can be used for same kind of separations like any insoluble solid from a liquid. But there is some difference. Here, the particles that can be separated by using centrifuging, that particles are held in suspension. Suspension is a type of mixture in which the solid particles, they mixed all through the liquid. They remain suspended in the liquid and only sink to the bottom very slowly. Okay, so such kind of mixtures that we discussed here, that are called suspension. If we having suspensions, then we can separate the particles from the suspension by using centrifuging. That is centrifuging machine. And in this centrifuge, an electric motor, it causes the test tubes. These are the test tubes that are shown here. When electric motor works, these test tubes, they revolve, they move at high speeds. And during the movement, what happens? You can see here that before the experiment, these solid particles, they are suspended. But after revolving over a specific speed, the particles slowly they move or they sink to the bottom, leaving the clear liquid behind. Okay, and after some time, by turning off the machine, we simply put out the test tube and easily get separate the liquid and insoluble particles. Have a closer look over here. In this side of the picture, you can see that this is before centrifugation, that you can clearly see here that solid is mixed all through the liquid. You can see here the suspended particles of this insoluble solid in the liquid. After performing the experiment or after centrifugation, you can see that all the solid, it sinks to the bottom and clear liquid shown here. This separation is basically on the basis of their densities. The dense particles being denser, they go to the bottom, and the clear liquid, it floats over it. Okay, so that were all the techniques we discussed so far that techniques, they can be used for carrying out the separations of any insoluble solid particles from a liquid. Okay, and the last topic, last point of today's topic is how to get separate a solid from a solution. Here, the important point to consider is what is solution. Okay, if we having a solution, so firstly we will discuss that what is solution. We use the method crystallization, okay, to separate the pure solids in the form of crystals from impurities suspended in the solution. Let's suppose if we have a solution and we want to separate the solid particles from that solution, or we want to get purify the solid particles from the impurities that are also present in the solution. So for such kind of separations, we use the technique that is called crystallization. So firstly, we will define that what is solution. Solution is a combination of two substances that are completely mixed with each other. When a solid, or simply we can define in a proper way that if a solid dissolve in a liquid, it produces a solution. Okay, when we mix any solid in a liquid, then it can, and if it completely dissolve in it, it forms a solution. Two important things related to the solution, that the solid is called solute and the liquid is called solvent. In making a solution, solute and solvent are important factors. So solute is basically the solid particles and solvent is basically the liquid. Okay, so if we having a solution and we want to separate the pure solids from that solution, so we use the term or the technique that is called crystallization. Okay, let's discuss the whole procedure of crystallization. How do we purify by crystallization? In crystallization, water is removed by heating the solution, and heating is stopped at the stage when a hot saturated solution is formed. We will discuss all these points in different steps, and it is the brief description that how crystallization purify a substance, or how the crystallization is used for purification of any substance. If the resulting solution is allowed to cool to room temperature, the dissolved solid will be formed as pure crystals. Actually, the first step is, you can see here that we having a beaker that contains solvent. Solvent means the liquid, and impure solid. Impure solid means the solid that we want to get separate in the form of crystals. It must having some impurities. The impurities contain any dust particles, any unwanted thing that is present in the solid, and that solid is mixed in a solvent to make a solution. Okay, the impure solid is dissolved in a solvent. The first step is we having impure solid and a solvent. So in first step, we mix these two objects, solute and the solvent, and make a solution. And that solution is called a saturated solution. Saturated solution means a solution that contains maximum amount of solute. We will add the solid into the solvent, and by using this stirrer, we continuously stir the solution, and we will continue adding the solid into the solvent until the further solid will not dissolve in the solvent. That solution is called saturated solution. Further, we will uh, do filtration to separate the impurities, and the filtrate is shifted in step 2 into the evaporating basin. Okay, evaporating basin, it's a kind of apparatus in which we heat the saturated solution. Okay, and the solution is heated to evaporate most of the solvent. When we heat the solution, definitely the solvent will be evaporated, leaving behind the solid. Okay, in the third step, you can see that the heating source is removed because we have to cool the solution, hot solution. The hot solution is allowed to cool. Cooling can be done at room temperature or in the presence of any freezing mixture. And after cooling, you can see that the liquid, when starts cooling, because the solution contains some solid particles, they will start crystallizing. Crystallizing means they will start solidifying again. So the solid appears as a pure crystal. Okay, after cooling of the hot saturated solution, we will observe that the solid crystals of the pure solid are begin to form. And in the last step, the cold solution is poured off to obtain the crystals. The crystals, they can be dried by pressing them between the sheets of filter paper. The crystals of that substance uh, can easily obtained on the filter paper by filtering the cold solution. Okay, so that is the procedure of crystallization. If we having a solution, okay, and we want to separate the dissolved solid from the solution in the form of pure crystals, so we will perform the technique that is called crystallization. And in simple steps of simply making hot saturated solution, then if the impurities are present, we can do filtration here after first step. And after that, we have to do evaporation, and then in the third step we have to do cooling. And when the crystals are formed, and in the last step, by filtration again, we can obtain the dry um, crystals of the solid substance on the filter paper. And in this way, these are the purified solid particles in the form of crystals that are obtained from a solution. So what kind of separations we can do by using crystallization? That include obtaining pure sugar. Okay, if we're having impure sugar and we want to separate or we want to purify, then we can perform the crystallization. Along with making pure silicon used in silicon chips, microchips that are used in computers that are made up of silicon. So it's very important to make silicon pure, and we can do it by simply doing crystallization, along with the purification of antibiotics. So these kind of separations, they can easily done with the help of crystallization. And that was all about today's lecture. I hope you all understand it very well. Goodbye.